But
Okay.
I appreciate you doing the show and coming on and talking to me. I
Hmm.
actually heard about you through now his name slips my mind. The gentleman that wrote the book. God, that's even slipping my mind. He was recently on Rogan, and
Yes, the new breath book. Yeah.
yes, that new breath book.
Hmm.
And I was listening to that. I myself had been on Rogan, and so I'm a fan. And I was listening, and he mentioned your work along with Dr. Richard Brown. So I thought, I knowing myself, I got to go right to the root of it, right to who the
Good for
author of
you.
that book was really talking to, and that research that was being done. So,
Yes.
if you don't mind, kind of walk me through what got you into the breath work for stress, anxiety, and how that's been going.
Well, actually, initially I was very skeptical about breath work. I had a very traditional medical training. I did all my training at Harvard and the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute. So it was quite traditional, and that was the first, 15, 20 years of my practice. But my husband had been very interested in all of these things. He's also a psychiatrist, Dr. Richard Brown. And he had been doing all kinds of mind body practices for decades. And then he became interested in using breathing practices to help in the treatment of his patients. And eventually he managed to get me interested in at least trying it. And I was really surprised. It was not what I expected. So I understand the skepticism of my colleagues and other people, because I was the biggest skeptic until I actually did it. And then I could not believe how the effects were, both for myself and for my colleagues who were also trying it for the first time.
What
And
was
then
the
eventually I started using it with my patients, because he kept telling me about what great results he was getting. And I thought, gee, I should try some of that. And it was wonderful. So that got me very interested when I started to see very positive responses in patients who had not responded to many, many other treatments. And then I got really interested in trying to understand how it worked, because I knew it wasn't like suggestion or placebo. I knew there had to be some mechanism. So then he and I spent a couple of years really digging into the science and trying to figure it all out.
So, what did you discover? What was the science aspect to the breathing that? Well, let's help the skeptics, right? Let's help. What they're skeptic, right? And as people should be, right? What did you figure out? What did you find in the science and the research over the years?
Well, let me just briefly tell you what we were seeing with our own eyes in our own patients, because I think that's really the most convincing thing it was for me
Yeah.
to see patients whom I had known for quite a few years, and who had really serious issues with either severe anxiety or serious trauma early in life, sexual abuse, all kinds of things. And they responded partially to other treatments, but when I added the breathing, there was a more deep, well, I would say like a total healing of certain traumas that had only partially healed before. And that intrigued me. So what we found over the years was that there are actually multiple mechanisms involved, not just one thing, which makes sense because we were really seeing global changes in people's emotions, how they regulated their emotions, their reactions. Their thinking became more positive, less negative, how they felt about their bodies,
Wow.
their ability to sleep. People who had had terrible sleep problems were able to sleep and have good dreams instead of nightmares.
Wow.
Um, and then there were just so many other benefits for anxiety. And also the other fascinating thing was it improved people's abilities to relate to others. And yeah,
So an
and
empathetic response, even.
empathetic, but also cognitive, in that problems that had been long-standing, say there was a really negative relationship that they just couldn't make it go right, or it had gone on for years, someone in their family, suddenly they would have a clear insight as to what it was really about. And that insight would enable them to then get past it and improve the relationship. And, some people it took many months. Other people, we would see these changes happen like within in a moment. It was as though the brain suddenly became able to heal itself and return to a healthy configuration. So that was quite powerful. Also, it improved people's cognitive abilities and many other physical benefits as well. A lot of pains went away. Physical problems began to heal because what we discovered, and these were things we discovered over many years, but it turns out that when you do this particular type of breathing, one of the things that it does is it changes the way your entire stress response system is working. So most people have some kind of imbalance in their stress response, and that's the underlying problem. The sympathetic and parasympathetic part of the nervous system. The sympathetic part is the fight, flight, defensive reaction, and the parasympathetic is the soothe, heal, restore, recover reaction. So just looking at that part of it, what the breathing that we use can do, and I want to mention there are many different kinds of breathing practices, yoga practices and all kinds. We call what we're doing voluntarily regulated breathing practices because that doesn't make it part of a religious practice. It's simply, something you can do for health or for healing or for medicine or whatever. So these voluntarily regulated breathing practices, and I'll refer them as VRBPs because it's a lot shorter, VRBPs. So what they do is they quiet down the overactivity of the sympathetic system, because that's most of us, we're so overstressed that our defense reactions are ratcheted up and they never kind of come down to normal. So it brings down the overactivity of the sympathetic system, and at the same time it boosts and strengthens the activity in the parasympathetic system. And we don't have any medicines to do that. The medicines that we use, say, for treating anxiety or depression, those medicines will tend to dampen down the sympathetic part of the system, which is why they help us feel calmer. But none of them actually boosts up the activity of the parasympathetic system. And that was discovered about 15 years ago, that in people who have excess stress, anxiety, trauma, all these conditions, they have both an overactivity in the sympathetic branch, but there's an underactivity in the parasympathetic branch. So even if you smush down the sympathetic overactivity, they're still not in balance.
That's new. I know a lot of people, they assume that, you've been through trauma or something, traumatic in your life, or have experienced something like that. I didn't even know that it really was the other side too. So a failure of a response of the other side, not just a diminishing of one side.
Exactly. And, when we went to medical school, we were taught that the function of the parasympathetic system is to counteract the sympathetic system to regulate all the glands and organs of the body. So if the sympathetic system speeds the heart, the parasympathetic system slows it down. That's all we knew back then. But what's been discovered since then is a whole world. Everyone was focusing on the sympathetic system and how to bring it down. Nobody was focusing on the parasympathetic system. But it turns out that only about 20% of the fibers in the vagus nerves, which are the main conduit for the pathways of the parasympathetic system, only about 20% of those fibers are needed to regulate all the internal glands and organs of the body. And so, they help regulate the heart and the respirations, the gastrointestinal tract, all of the internal organs. But about 80% of the fibers are carrying messages from the body up to the brain to inform the brain about what is happening everywhere in the body from millisecond to millisecond. And those messages to the brain are very powerful, and they go to all of the main regulatory areas of the brain. So they have a huge effect. And what's special about breathing is that, first of all, it's the only automatic function that we can voluntarily regulate, okay? And second of all, breathing is such a vital function that the messages that go from the respiratory system to the brain are very powerful, and they have kind of top priority with the brain because, you know, if you stub your toe and your toe sends a message to the brain saying, ouch, 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 yeah, you want to pay attention to it, but it's not going to kill you. However, if there's something wrong with your airway and you can't breathe, you got to get that message through because the brain has to figure out how to clear your airway within minutes or you're done. So the messages are very rapid. They're very powerful. They get the brain's attention and they get the whole brain going. So this is one of the reasons why we think these messages can have such rapid, widespread effects on what's going on in the brain. So when we change our pattern of breathing, what are we doing?
You're changing the message that we're sending to the brain.
Exactly, exactly. And if we can figure out the code, which patterns of breathing will send the messages that we want to affect the brain and the mind, well, then we've got something quite powerful.
Oh my God. Man, from a mental health standpoint, I'm like, I did not even know Pandora's box here. And I can see how you crossing over going, okay, I'll pay attention, and then discovering this and going, oh my word.
It was very exciting, very exciting. And of course, there are hundreds of different breathing practices that have been developed in yoga and Tai Chi, and martial arts use breathing practices, and athletics of different kinds, and even performers in the arts use different breathing practices. So it's not that this is a new thing, but what it means is that there have been thousands of years of experimentation, because these ancient yogis would sit for 8 or 10 hours a day, and they would experiment to see, and really studying their own minds, focusing on subtle changes. They would see, well, if I breathe this way, then I get that happening. If I breathe that way, I get that. So they created all of these different practices that we're now free to study. So we can have somebody do the practices and we can measure things, or we can ask them how they feel. And so it all comes together. There's also a lot of research that's been done on the vagal nerves themselves and the pathways and where they send all their messages. So we have a lot of neuroscience now that the yogis didn't have. Plus we have brain imaging and all kinds of tests we can do to further understand what is happening. And all of this information we've brought together in our papers, our scientific papers, and our books that we've published. But basically, what's happening, for example, if you were to take just one breathing practice, a fundamental practice, it's the basis of our work. We use multiple practices, but this one is the basic one that, really brings about a vast amount of benefits. It has different names. Some people call it coherent breathing, and some people call it resonant breathing. But it's very simple. It's just slowing your breathing down to, on average, for the average adult, around 5 breaths per minute, with an equal length for the inhale and the exhale, and breathing very, very gently, not exerting any effort, not trying to completely fill the lungs, not pushing it out, really minimal effort, like a natural breathing, but very slowly and with equal inhale and exhale, preferably through the nose, but if you have to, you can do it through the mouth. So this is the breathing that we've been studying mostly. And the effects of this particular breath form are, number one, it is the simplest and fastest way to balance the activity of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. It optimizes the balance there. Other things that it does, it reduces the overactivity in the emotion centers, like in the amygdala.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of that, where our emotions are processed, is an area of the brain. What happens in people who have too much stress or trauma is that the emotion centers become overactive, and they're sending out, they're either overreacting to a situation, or they're sending out erratic signals or very strong signals. And these signals cause a lot of the symptoms that we see when people are anxious or upset. So one of the things that these messages do is they quiet down that overreactivity in the emotion centers. Another effect that they have is they will increase the activity in the higher thinking centers, where the way that we're supposed to function ideally is that, yes, we have emotions, but the higher centers, the thinking areas, they can modify the emotions. So, for example, if you're walking in the woods and you see something that looks like a snake and your heart speeds up and you start to get anxious and you look at it, and then your mind kind of analyzes and no, that's just a stick.
Yeah.
So the higher center then calms down the emotional overreactivity. That's how, when it works well, okay? But when people have had too much stress or trauma, this circuit becomes dysfunctional.
Now, what causes that dysfunction, right? How does the trauma itself or the experience cause that dysfunction in the brain, or in either system?
Well, there are a lot of things that happen, and again, it also depends on what time of life. But for example, when there's too much stress or trauma, you get an excess release of excitatory neurotransmitters like glutamate, and you get excess levels of cortisol. And if those go on too long, they can actually damage the circuitry in those areas.
Literally brain functioning damage.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Especially if they occur very early in life, when the system is just developing and is vulnerable to being affected.
Hence how detrimental child abuse or a child coming up in a traumatic environment is to that person.
Or severe neglect, the death of a parent, the loss of a parent. If you think about all of these children of war, displaced refugee children, they're being damaged. Their brains are actually being damaged by the separation that they have been forced to experience, and the deprivation, the emotional deprivation, because all of our emotional development is happening at that time. And for people, the development of our emotions is completely dependent on our relationships. We develop emotionally within the context of a relationship, preferably with someone who cares about us and holds us. And it's through that close relationship, and especially the holding, that we develop the ability to regulate our emotions. It's called co-regulation. So when you see a mother holding a baby close to her, the mother's body is regulating the physiology of the baby, and the baby's body is regulating the physiology of the mother. And all of this goes on while the nervous system is developing and affects the healthy development. But if you disrupt that process for too long or too many times or at a critical stage of development, then there's going to be some kind of a deficit. Now, it's not that you can never make that up, because we know the mind and the emotions, people are amazing in the way that they can learn, recover, compensate, and so on later on. But it means that that person goes into the world with certain dysfunctions, and dysfunction in emotion regulation is one of the consequences. But also, even, if someone has had a good childhood, if they go through too many stressful things, that may not be causing damage to the nervous system in the same way, but it causes dysfunctions in that circuitry as well.
Stress seems to be the silent killer, I think, here in the United States, as we're especially in now times. But
Yes.
we seem to be so stressed out, and it is this silent thing that we typically don't pay attention to. It's just how we are. It's just what we have to do.
Yeah. Some people are more aware of it than other people. Some people know when they're stressed, but some people And often people who are very high functioning, who have very demanding jobs, they learn to ignore their inner signals about how stressed they are. So if you ask them, they'll say, hey, I'm not stressed, I'm fine, I'm handling it. But that's not always the case. There's still internal stuff. And what happens when, for example, the sympathetic system is being driven and is on overdrive, when that system is going, it burns a tremendous amount of energy. The brain is like the gas guzzler of the body. It burns a huge amount of energy. And when we're geared up to fight or run away, even more so. And when you burn a lot of energy, you generate free radicals as a byproduct of burning energy. Free radicals are those little tiny molecules that bounce around and damage cellular components as they go. They'll damage the membranes, they'll damage the energy-producing mitochondria, they'll damage the nucleus, they'll even damage the DNA eventually. So normally our bodies have lots of mechanisms to counteract the free radicals and to repair the damage as it goes. It's sort of fixing itself as it goes. But what can happen when you have repeated unrelenting sequences of stress and the system never gets to come down to baseline, then you start accumulating damage because the repair systems cannot keep up with the rate of damage. And that's the connection between stress and the progression of most of the illnesses that we see in our society today, because the free radicals go everywhere. So they're damaging and aging the brain. They're damaging the blood vessels inside. They're causing cardiovascular disease and the progression of many illnesses that we see go on as we age. And that's another effect of the stress.
Now, are you seeing a reversal or sort of a plasticity, right? The neuroplasticity in the brain, if how we're injuring it or damaging it over time, are you seeing an ability to be able to reverse that with certain practices?
Well, our ways of assessing that are indirect. Okay, so it's not like there's been a traumatic head injury and you can see it on a brain scan and then the whole thing heals. You can't. It's not at that level.
Yeah.
It's at a much finer level. But what you do see is changes in the person, in how they think and feel and behave, that indicate that something has changed inside their brain, inside their mind. And sometimes it's quite dramatic. We have cases, I don't want to go into all of them, but where an individual has had a particular trauma and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder for years. And they've had years of therapy, and they've had medications, and they've had all kinds of stuff. And then they get a course of the breathing practices, and at some point during those practices, whatever those symptoms were completely vanish, and they feel whole again. They feel and they are healed. And once that switch happens, it's permanent. It doesn't happen for everybody. Most people get, other degrees of benefit, but we've actually seen quite a few where there's been a complete resolution of all of their trauma symptoms.
Is it specifically focused on trauma and people that have experienced trauma in their lives, or is that where you're seeing the most benefit for it?
We see benefits, not just the people with that kind of trauma, it's most dramatic. But certainly there are benefits for people who have ordinary everyday stresses. We see it across the board. It helps with everyday anxiety, everyday stress, everyday depression, trouble sleeping. It's wonderful. Trouble concentrating.
I gotta imagine that it's difficult for you to get around those that come in seeking that. It's probably going to be a pill. I need medicine. Hook me up in this method. And you mentioned breathing, and I can see some high functioning person, right, who's always on the move, right, who's coming in for that quick fix, kind of hear the breathing part and go, oh boy.
Well, usually by the time someone comes to me, because I'm an MD psychiatrist, they've usually been through a bunch of other things. And some are more willing than others. But if someone comes to me and tells me that they have some anxiety or they can't sleep, and would I give them some Xanax or, some other benzodiazepine, I'll say no now, because I know there's a better way. And I'll say, really, I don't prescribe these unless they're already dependent on them and I have to go through getting them to withdraw. But I say, there are other ways. Would you be interested in trying A, B, C, D? And often people say, I don't want to get hooked on those meds. And I tell them, if I give this to you, within a few weeks, you're going to need an increase in your dose. And then a month later, it's not going to work, and you're going to get yourself addicted, and then you're going to have a big problem. So this is a temporary Band-Aid that is not good for you. And I don't want to be doing a treatment that I don't believe in and I think is going to harm you. So I take the time to try to explain it as best I can. And I'm pretty convincing with most people, not everyone, but.
Bless you for that. That is something I have been bringing awareness to for the last 5 years on this podcast. And thank God someone of your status and your learnings and title would say that on here. To me, that makes you the hero in mental health.
Oh,
on that side.
It's not that I don't ever prescribe medicines, because some people really do need medication, and breathing is not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything.
Right.
However, for most patients that I've seen, regardless of their problem, when I offer them the breathing, it helps them in some important way. And what we love about the coherent breathing is this. First of all, it's very healthy, because not only does it help with anxiety and trauma and stress, but it also turns on the anti-inflammatory system of the body.
That's huge.
Which happens to be the vagal system. That is the main anti-inflammatory nervous tract are through the vagal system. So when we activate that, we're activating the healing anti-inflammatory part of your system. So many physical disorders begin to improve. And inflammation has also been linked to depression. So it's kind of a win-win-win-win thing. The other thing is that when you activate the vagus nerves, it has an anti-pain effect, and you can significantly reduce the level of pain that people are experiencing from whatever is causing them pain. So that's very helpful. And that can, being relieved of pain, having a way to improve your pain level without having to take more medication, that's very important.
Yeah, that's amazing.
The other thing is that this breathing improves cardiorespiratory fitness and athletic performance.
Wow.
Very much so. And the athletes that we've taught this to have been amazed, especially if they're going to high altitudes. Because what this breathing does is it increases the amount of oxygen that gets exchanged in the lungs with every breath and uses less energy to do it. It can prevent high mountain altitude sickness.
Wow.
So if we know someone who's going on a vacation, mountain climbing,
I've had
skiing,
that.
whatever.
I had altitude sickness, and it is one of the worst feelings.
Yeah.
I think I described it as having the bends from diving and being drunk.
Yes. Yeah, we've had people actually stop it by using this breathing practice. And, I could go into, I had to not only read all the psychological literature, but I read a lot of the respiratory literature, which for someone who's not a respiratory physiologist, that was challenging. But clearly, and there have been studies showing that this happens. I don't want to go into all the boring details of it.
No, please
but
do.
For example, please do.
Please do. Those details are what I enjoy and the listeners enjoy. Yeah.
Well, we first got onto this because there's an Italian cardiologist named Luciano Bernardi, whom we've met and spent time with. He's a great researcher. And he was studying the effects of high altitude. So he took a group of athletes, and half of them, he had them come to his lab every day for an hour for 2 years and do coherent breathing. But it was at 6 breaths per minute. It was a slightly faster rate, but it was fundamentally the same. And the other group just did their normal intense workout. And then he took them on an expedition to climb in the Himalayas, the highest mountain. And when they got to the top, the athletes who had done this breathing were able to get to the peak without oxygen, and their breathing rate was 10 breaths per minute.
Oh my God.
Whereas the other ones struggled even with oxygen to get up there. And what he found was that over the course of the 2 years of doing this every day, they had almost doubled their capacity to exchange oxygen. Because what it does, oxygen is exchanged across the wall of the alveolar sacs, those little air sacs. There are millions of them in the lungs. They're called alveoli. And what happens is that the oxygen has to go across the wall of the alveolus. Well, if you expand it, you're expanding the surface area of that little bubble. And the more surface area, the more oxygen is exchanged. So the breathing both opens up more of the alveoli, because normally, there's a lot of dead space in there. We're only using about 30% of the potential space. So gradually, this breathing opens up more and more of the alveoli and expands them, so you have this huge surface area across which you can exchange oxygen. It becomes much more efficient.
Why do you think that is, that we're only using 20%? Like, did we used to be fish or something? Or be able to hold our breath and come up for a long time? That's interesting. I did not know that we only use about 20% of the space in the lung.
30%. Yeah, we use about 30% of the potential surface area to exchange oxygen. There's a lot of redundancy in the human body, I suppose. If you damaged or lost part of a lung, people can survive on one lung because there's so much redundancy. It helps survival, but also if you think about, we evolved at a time when we were much more physically active than we are now. So we probably originally were using more of that than we do these days.
Oh yeah, so we're just slowly losing parts of it and not using parts, right?
But they're still there. We can bring them back. That's the amazing thing.
Wow, the human body is amazing to me. So in this breathing, more of that research. I love the stories and the research, and that was going to be my following question was, what are some of the research experiments you've been a part of or you've seen or you've dove into, written about, etc., that really started to open your eyes and mind to this, oh my God, right? That we really may be onto something.
Well, I'll tell you, the oh my God came when I saw it with my patients in front of me. Sure. Those were the first, oh my God, right. This is so simple. This has no side effects or hardly any, and it doesn't cost, billions of dollars. So I saw it as I see this as really the future. The problem is that a lot of medicine and research is now being driven by money, by what's going to be the most expensive treatment that's going to give the most profit to the people who are sponsoring that research. And if you have something so simple that everyone has access to the air, everyone has lungs, they can do it themselves, it's not going to make billions of dollars. So it's very, very difficult to get funding to do studies of this. So a lot of our funding we've done pro bono, nobody got paid, or on a shoestring, but we've managed to do it anyway. Sometimes we get a sponsor for the research. A number of our studies have been in disasters. In other words, people who have survived a disaster and are highly traumatized. And we've worked with, one of them was with survivors of the Southeast Asia tsunami. We've done years of work with people affected by the New York World Trade Center attacks, because my husband's practice was in New York, and we work with a nonprofit there called Serving Those Who Serve. They were providing alternative and holistic treatment for people who were affected by the World Trade Center attacks, mostly first responders, but then anybody in the community. And those folks were suffering, so not only the psychological effects, but the physical effects, the respiratory problems that they had. And many of them went to clinics that were set up in New York, specialty clinics. They'd go to these respiratory clinics, they'd go for the counseling, they'd go for this or that, and they weren't getting better. So this little group, they were people who had felt compelled to go to ground zero every day for like a year to volunteer. They could not do anything. They were just compelled to go. And they all got sick from inhaling the fumes and so on. So they themselves were searching for self-healing as well as how to help everybody else. So for years, they asked Dr. Brown to provide them with some of his movement and breathing practices, which he did. And the response was so positive that, you know, we become regulars with them. So twice a year, actually, we're going to be doing one in September. We do it pro bono. They charge a fee in order to help support the organization, but they'll have a sliding scale so that anyone, even if you can't afford anything, can. And they try to get first responders or anybody affected, but anyone can participate in this program. And we saw over the years what happened was that a lot of people began to tell us how it was healing their psychological wounds, their invisible wounds, that they were, you know, able to calm down, they were able to overcome anxiety, they were able to sleep, their trauma symptoms remitted, they were able to go back to work, they could be with people. One of the symptoms of trauma is numbing, emotional numbing. And, you know, people think of the dramatic things like flashbacks or, you know, anger outbursts, but there's this quiet symptom where the person suddenly loses their entire emotional life. They feel nothing and they feel disconnected. They're not to everything, to anyone. They're like in this gray void, and they suffer because they want desperately to get back to what they used to feel. And we had people come who'd been in that state for years, and during the course, which our workshop is 2 days, like it's 1.5 days, during, you know, after a few hours of breathing, to suddenly recover your entire emotional life and be able to feel connected and loving with people. That's amazing, you know. So those kinds of things we started to see happening with these survivors. And so we did a couple of small studies, you know, they weren't fancy, but we did like a lot of before and after measures. Other scientists volunteered to do the testing for us and so on. And it showed that after this 2-day workshop, there was a very significant improvement in measures of anxiety, depression, stress, and so forth. So those were some of the studies we did. We also did a study at the Nathan Klein Institute with schizophrenic patients and found that their cognitive functions improved. Wow. People had been telling us that their minds were clear, they were thinking more clearly, that was actually in a very difficult population. We did a study at the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center at Cornell. It's a specialty clinic. You know, you might know people who have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. These are very serious. It is a disorder of immune response that's driven by stress. And a wonderful philanthropist provided funding for us to do a randomized controlled study of some of these very ill patients. They were given the same 2-day program, and then once a week they had like a 90-minute follow-up session, and then once a month, and we followed them for about 6 months. And what we found over the course of time was that there was a comparison group, a control group. The control group didn't improve on any of the measures. The group that we worked with, everything that they could measure improved. Their IBD symptoms improved, their pain, their disability, their mood, their anxiety, everything literally that we could measure significantly improved in 6 months in these very ill patients. And you know, we did not include endoscopies or colonoscopies or all of that in the study because we didn't have funding for that. But some of them were due to get their colonoscopies, you know, with their doctors, and they told us that when they went to get their colonoscopy, the doctors told them that they had no more lesions.
What?
2 of them,
that
no
had
lesions.
To freak you all out. You had to go.
Right, but the icing on the cake was that their doctor never asked them what they were doing.
What? It just like must be it's a miracle. We
I
did
don't
it.
know.
It's a miracle.
I don't know. And if they, probably if they said they were breathing, they'd say, "Oh, that's a placebo response."
So is that the pushback you're mainly getting from the field? Is that the breathing part is a placebo effect?
The main problem, and I don't want to trivialize it, is that most doctors believe what they learned in medical school, as did I for 20 years. And if it wasn't in their medical school curriculum, they don't believe it's valid.
Mm.
And so if you talk to them about breathing, healing people with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, they just don't understand. They think you're out of your mind. They don't know what breathing does. They haven't read the literature, and they have no basis to even understand what you're talking about.
It's sort of the same with nutrition as well. I tend to notice, right, when it comes to nutrition and doctors, it's avoided. So the breathing is kind of the same way.
Yeah. So I thought, and the people who did the study with us, they did it reluctantly. They didn't think it would work, but because someone had given them money and insisted, so they were quite surprised. And we thought this is going to revolutionize the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease in this country.
Yeah.
Well, guess what?
Buried that study.
It's like a tree falls in the forest. Nobody.
Well, you mentioned
we've had a
it.
little bit of interest in it, but yeah.
You mentioned it. It's like preaching nutrition or preaching natural herbs and minerals, right? Another guest we had on the podcast, God, I'm terrible at remembering names today. She's been researching the mineral effect by supplements and mineral effects, some herbal effects on treating people with mental health and mental illness, and her results have been amazing. She has just come up with just some wild things, but you don't hear about these things, or like you said, you're brushed off as being, oh, you're one of those, you're woo, right? I mean, they brush it off, but I think you said it correctly. There's no money in minerals. There's no money in vitamins. There's no money in nutrition. There's no money in breathing.
Right. But the other thing I never got to, the other thing that we really like about this breathing is that we tell people, for most people, they have to do it 20 minutes a day. They have to find 20 minutes to do it. 20 straight minutes. That's the, quote, therapeutic dose. Mm-hmm. Except if they have severe anxiety or PTSD in the beginning, twice a day. And then when they're better, they go down to once a day. But also, after they've been doing the breathing at home with their eyes closed in their quiet space, we encourage them then to begin doing it with their eyes open. You put on a soundtrack so you can hear these little tones, and it cues you when to breathe in and when to breathe out. And just, go about, puttering in the kitchen, doing your laundry, whatever. Just do the breathing while you're doing other things so they get used to it. And then they can do it anywhere, anytime. If they're in a meeting or they have to go to an interview and they're nervous, they can just sit there doing this quiet breathing and nobody knows you're doing it. It's totally private.
Is that why you're trying to teach with the eyes open as well, is to be able to use that out in public, right, where you don't look like you're sitting there?
Anywhere. And people don't know why you're the only calm person in the room.
Yeah.
I see a lot of college students near where we live, and I tell them, okay, you have test-taking anxiety, your mind goes blank. This is what you do. On your way to the test, while you're walking, start your coherent breathing and keep doing it while you sit down, while they pass out the tests, and keep yourself calm. And if you need to, you can keep doing it while you're taking the test to help keep yourself calm, and your mind will be clearer. And that's what they do. So any kind of anxiety, performance anxiety, I tell you, you're waiting to go on stage. Okay, do your breathing while you're waiting so you won't work yourself up into, a state of anxiety.
Yeah, there's some people that have the pass out response to stress or anxiety, right? They get so anxious or so stressed out, they either have it was pseudo seizures is what we called them when I was practicing. Right, the pseudo seizure of the muscle contracting and shaking around, or they pass out. What
Right.
What's happening in the body to someone that is pushed to some anxious level or stress level where they do have a pseudo seizure, right? Where for 20 minutes the muscles are tensing and shaking, or they do pass out.
Mm-hmm. Well, that could be a number of different things. There's also, they may be having what's called a vasovagal reaction. We do have, to talk a little bit about polyvagal theory.
Okay.
So a researcher named Stephen Porges, you would love to read his papers and his book. Okay, you've got to write that down. Stephen Porges, Porges.
Got you. That I
revolutionized our understanding of the vagus nerve. He traced the pathways of the vagus nerve in all different species and its evolution. And what he says is that our current vagal system contains elements from lower previous evolutionary levels, which is true of many aspects of our physiology. So the first development was the unmyelinated vagal system. Myelin is a sheath that coats the nerves and makes them transmit faster. But there was a vagal system before without any coating, okay? And that was found in reptiles. And so you see how reptiles are, like a crocodile, they like to lie on a rock in the sun and chill.
Yeah, there's no emotion. They have no emotion. They'll just eat something whole and just look at you like, what? Right.
That's right. Right. You know how reptiles are, in general. I'm sure there's some friendly frogs and other things. They're amphibians. I'm sorry. They're different. Frogs are different. Okay. So those are the reptiles. And then the next evolutionary system was the sympathetic nervous system. Okay. So first we had unmyelinated. That's one piece. Then we have the sympathetic system was developed for our fight reactions. And then there's one more level called the myelinated vagal system. And this is the most recent development where some of the fibers in the vagus nerve got this myelin sheathing on them. And it's found mainly in mammals, but especially in primates, and highest developed in primates and humans. And this system, this myelinated system, is responsible for our ability to have relationships, human relationships. This is according to Polyvagal Theory. This is the part of the system that enables us to be emotionally communicative with one another. And only about 3% of the fibers are involved in this whole system that has developed in primates and humans, even more so. So what happens is when the myelinated part of the system, the myelinated vagus system, is working well, we're very sociable, we communicate, we have positive feelings towards each other, we're able to be close, we're able to experience bonding, love, empathy, and we're able to cooperate with other people. All of these, what you would think of as the highest level of human functions as a society. Okay, that's the myelinated vagal system, and he calls that, and I agree with him, kind of the safe zone. We feel calm, we can feel loved, we can feel compassionate. All of these positive emotions are going through this part of the system. When there's danger and we feel threatened, then the sympathetic system comes in to help us either fight or run away. When we're in a sympathetic state, we're not feeling especially friendly or bonding or lovey-dovey. We're experiencing either fear or anger or an urge to hurt someone. That's necessary for survival, but you wouldn't want to stay in that zone. Now, when people train for military deployment, for example, they are trained to be in a sympathetic state for survival, because if they let their guard down for a moment, a sniper will get them. And their problem is if they're there too long, when they come home, they can't switch back to the green zone. They're stuck in that overreactivity and inability to relate to people. Yeah. Now, if you're in a situation where you're threatened and you can neither fight or run away because your adversary is overpowering, bigger, stronger, whatever, and you think you'll be killed, then we may default down to the lower evolutionary level of the vagal, unmyelinated vagal system. And that's where you see the freeze reaction. And it's what you see in animals, what they call death feigning, when the animal looks like it's fainted and, in order to not be attacked. So that's a whole other system. So what we're doing with the breathing is we're strengthening the activity in the green zone. We're strengthening the system that keeps us in the green zone. And we can teach this, for example, to active duty or veterans, military personnel. They'll then have a tool to help themselves get out of the red zone and into, or the orange zone, get into the green zone when they come home and they have to be with people. And that's true of any population that's been stressed out. So people who've been through traumas, who've survived disasters, whether it's war or floods, we've worked with many different kinds of disaster survivors. We've worked with refugees from different countries. They will find tremendous relief in the practices that we teach. And children also.
I was going to say a child coming from an abused home is very similar to a war zone of sorts. I am fascinated the more I keep learning how much of us we don't use, right? I mean, his research in this is showing what 3% or something is about what we're utilizing of that covering of that.
Well, that's all there is. We're using all of those vagal nerves. There just aren't a whole lot of them, but the few that there are going up into the brain, and then they have connections to all these higher level centers. I also wanted to mention, because you look like you're worrying about the time, I can stay a little longer.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
I want to finish what we're talking about.
There's actually, I can see people out the studio window. And so they keep walking by back and forth, and I live on the beach, so I'm kind of like, why would anyone be right there? Sorry. No, I have. This is all I was looking forward to. I'm fascinated still by this.
So did I answer your question?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's when we drop down a level. So the people that are passing out, or the people that are having the muscle shakes or tremors or whatever, or pseudo seizures like that during anxious, they're really just dropping down an evolutionary level of a human response. But it is a natural response.
Yes, and there is an aspect of the vagus nerve that if you under certain circumstances, because it does many different things, can suddenly slow the heart down too much. And that's part of the reaction that you could also be seeing, sudden slowing of the heart.
So it slows it down, then that's when someone would pass out, basically.
If it does it too much and too suddenly, yeah, that could happen.
Understood. So
we're going to talk about children. Did you want to talk about children? And you want to talk about what's happening now with COVID and how important the breathing is for people dealing with COVID stress?
Sure. Yeah, I can imagine. But I was actually intrigued about the CO2 and the differences on how much we think that CO2 is that it's the bad thing, right? That oxygen is the good thing. Can you talk or elaborate a little bit more sort of about what I'm dancing on, basically, not explaining it very well, but why that CO2 is actually important to our breathing and in our functioning?
Well, we need to maintain within a certain range both CO2 and oxygen. You don't want too much or too little of either. And CO2 is also important for maintaining the pH level in our bodies. So it has, in that sense, an important function. Now, we get problems sometimes. For example, there are a lot of different breathing practices where you breathe very fast or very forcefully. And it's called what you call hyperventilation, although people don't like to admit it, it's hyperventilation. When you breathe to the point where you lower the amount of carbon dioxide, the saturation of carbon dioxide, or the percentage amount in your bloodstream, if it goes too low, what will happen is you'll start to get cramps, first tingling, but then actual cramps in your hands and feet.
Yeah. Oh, please go on. Please, I'm
Yeah.
I'm intrigued.
So anyway, but we don't teach that kind of breathing, and we
Are there
very healthy
benefits to that kind
people
of
do
breathing?
that. Are there benefits?
Mm.
Yeah. That kind of breathing will make people more alert.
Mm.
It can be energizing. Some people do it to excess because it can cause altered mental states, and they want to get high or have a trip of some kind doing it.
Sure. Sure.
I'm not a big fan.
Oh, yeah, I can tell. I can tell. So you also do a lot of work with herbal supplementation and mixing that into treating. Are there certain herbal treatments that you move to, that you go to, then dealing with stress, anxiety, or let's focus on the stress and anxiety treatment?
That's a whole other subject. But I will tell you, there are some very good anti-stress herbs. We write about them in our books. We have information about them on our websites. I don't tend to use the more commonly known ones, like valerian or passion root. Those, they're for mild anxiety. And most of the people that I see have more severe anxiety. And so, lavender and all those, they're light. They're very lovely, but for serious anxiety, we need other things. And when I have a person come in with serious anxiety, honestly, the first thing I want to do is teach them breathing, because it is more effective than any of the herbs. And it's just, the challenge is to get people to practice it on a regular basis. But I find when people come in, it takes me about 15 minutes or 10 minutes to teach them basic breathing practices that we use. And during that time, 99%, they'll tell me, this is the most relaxed I remember feeling in years. And once they get that experience in the office, then, I say, well, you can do this for yourself at home. Look, it took you 15 minutes. And they say, well, how long is the effect going to last? I said, well, it's variable. You might feel good like this for an hour. It might last for 4 hours. But if it goes away, all you have to do is play this little soundtrack and slow your breathing down, and you can feel this way again. So it's a big motivator because it works so quickly. People need to feel something right away.
Well, I know we had talked about via email a demonstration of the breathing technique, or how someone can do that. Mm-hmm. Are we able to do that?
Well, I had asked you, I don't know if it's possible to screen share on Skype.
Yeah, down at the bottom right there.
Soundtrack. It is. Okay.
Yeah, down share at the bottom screen. Right.
Share computer sound. Oh, okay. Then let me just bring up my soundtrack so I can play that for you. Where's my Spotify? Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Okay. So what I'm going to do is teach you a little bit of coherent breathing. And we have a wonderful soundtrack we've started using that was created by a wonderful teacher. His name is Claude Stein, and I'm just trying to get that on here now. Let's see. Okay.
And I appreciate you doing this too, and something like this that people can hear, listen to, and practice themselves. You're really, from what I've learned already, you're giving them the number one tool in the tool belt here for many things that we experience in life.
Well, would you first tell me how the sound is? You're going to hear some tones.
Not coming through.
Okay. Start sharing.
See if it allows it there.
Can you hear it?
No, not just, I cannot.
Turn it up.
I'm wondering if it'll allow the computer sound to play through, because we are using...
Maybe not, because
Yeah, yeah.
Because of the headphone. Yeah, okay. So I'll just time it with my voice then.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask everyone, am I seeing you now?
Yep, I see you.
Okay, because I'm not seeing you. So how do I stop screen sharing?
My guess would be the, let's see, bottom right there. Looks like you can just click on the screen share at the bottom right again, or you can find the Skype app and click that up. It should pull me back up.
It's not.
Of course not.
It's not showing me, of course. All right, let me close this out. All right, well, I'll just do it, and then we'll figure that out after. Okay?
All right.
All right.
Okay.
So, you said it's on the Skype app?
Yeah, like pull up just like you were opening up Skype. It should come back up to bring your screen back up.
Oh, wait a second. There's something. Nope. All I'm seeing is this thing saying share computer sound, but it's not letting me see. I see your face, but nothing's moving. But you can see me, all right? And
I
you can
can,
hear
yeah.
me?
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to ask everyone to just get very comfortable in their chair or whatever they're sitting in, with the feet on the floor and hands resting on your lap, palms up or down, whatever feels right to you. And we're just going to start by taking 2 deep, relaxing breaths. So breathe with me. Let's breathe in and out with a sigh. And again, breathing in and out with a sigh. And as you breathe out, let your eyes close if you're comfortable. And if you're not, just gaze down toward the floor and begin to soften the muscles around your eyes. Soften your eyelids and your eyebrows. Soften your cheeks and your jaw. Soften the muscles of your neck and shoulders. And soften all the muscles of your back, starting at the top of your spine and going all the way down your back. And relax the muscles of your arms, your chest, belly, and your legs. Good. And now, just on your own, very gently, just slow your breathing down a little bit. Just slow it down. And I'm going to count. I'm going to pace your breathing for you. And when you breathe in, you're going to breathe in very gently and softly. You don't need to overfill your lungs. Actually, just let the air come in about up to your collarbones, okay? So you don't need to way overfill them. And when you breathe out, just let the air out naturally. No need to push it out. No need to push it all out. You don't want to be using any of your muscles to do this. Just let it be very soft and very natural and slow. So let's begin with breathing in, 2, 3, and breathing out, 2, 3. Breathing in, 2, 3, and breathing out, 2, 3. Breathing in, 2, 3, and breathing out, 2, 3. Breathing in, 2, 3, and breathing out, 2, 3. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. And breathing out, 2, 3, 4. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Gently out, 2, 3, 4. Softly in, 2, 3, 4. Gently out, 2, 3, 4. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. And breathing out, 2, 3, 4. Gently in, softly out. Breathing in, and breathing out. Gently in, softly out. Breathing in, let your belly expand a little. And breathing out, let your belly contract. Softly in, gently out. Breathing in, and breathing out. Gently in, softly out. Even more gently in. Even more softly out. Breathing in, don't need to overfill the lungs. And breathing out, no need to push all the air. Breathing in, and as you breathe out, let go more and more. Breathing in, breathing out, letting go. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Softly in, gently out. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing out. Now, keeping your eyes closed, let your breath return to its natural rhythm. And keeping your eyes closed, notice how your body feels. And keeping your eyes closed, notice your thoughts. And now let's take 2 deep, relaxing breaths. Deep breath in, and let it go with a sigh. Deep breath in, and let it go. When you're ready, you can open your eyes.
That is a beautiful thing. That is a very relaxing and beautiful thing.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope everyone's feeling a little more relaxed and mellow than they were.
I certainly am. I don't know how I'm going to carry on a Cognitive Rampage podcast as I have brought myself to a place. Are there any tips for someone that's trying that, right? On how to breathe, right? Because I know a lot of people breathe to the chest, right? They fill up the chest with oxygen. And are there any certain methods that they should pay attention to?
Well, you notice I didn't focus on that. I didn't focus on, breathing to different parts of the lung and this and that. And the reason for that is that if you simply slow your breathing down and very gently do coherent breathing, all of that takes care of itself. And you will get the best, what we call perfusion ventilation ratio, where the bloodstream matches where the oxygen is going, and everything will work the way it should optimally, just doing that. So you don't have to worry about where you're breathing. And in fact, we try to do the breathing. One of the reasons we suggest people use the soundtrack I mentioned, which people can find out about that on our website, is because once you start thinking and trying to do things, now you've activated the part of the brain that we're trying to quiet down, so it's counterproductive.
That makes sense.
The less you think, the less you do, the more you simply breathe, the better it works.
Wow. I did notice that when I started, I was thinking about how I was supposed to breathe, because I learned typically you're supposed to breathe from the belly, right?
Right.
And as I started, I realized I wasn't, right? But then as I kind of let that go, I did notice that I naturally, it just started breathing how it was supposed to. So for anybody that wants to do that, right, is to sit down with that practice, and I would assume a quiet place, right, to start, and do that for 20 minutes a day.
Yes, exactly. And then when you finish, ideally, you just lie on your right side and just rest for a couple of minutes so that it will consolidate the changes in your system. And doing that every day over time and allowing it to consolidate, you're going to begin to see changes more and more over time, the more that you do it. There are some immediate benefits, of course, because you feel relaxed. What did you notice about your thoughts doing this breathing? What happened to your thinking?
They slowed down. Which is rare for me. They slowed down.
Right. All that chatter, all the noise, the mind becomes very clear and uncluttered. It's really nice.
Yeah, there's, it's similar to a meditation type of thing, just using a different breathing method.
It is a form of meditation, absolutely. And it's a form of mindfulness in that you are enhancing your awareness of your breathing. And there have been some fascinating studies showing that when you use voluntary breathing like this, it activates many more parts of the brain. And when you focus your attention on it, your awareness on your breathing, then you further activate more areas of the brain.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and in fact, the breathing pattern entrains or can determine your brainwave pattern throughout your brain. The breathing can do that if you use this kind of breathing.
Because it's sending the signals, like you said in the beginning, of our breathing is sort of regulating, right? Telling our brain what's happening. So if we're breathing quickly, it's computing back and forth to each other, going, we should be nervous, we should be anxious, we should be scared now, hence breathing that way.
Right. Because the lungs talk to the brain, and the brain understands what they're saying very well, and it listens. That's what I say, the brain listens to the lungs.
Oh, so really it's the lungs running things in the body.
Well, yes and no, because when we voluntarily change our pattern of breathing, we're telling the lungs how to breathe. It's a kind of self-empowerment. You're basically learning to use the power of your own body and physiology. You're learning how to work your own nervous system in the direction that you want it to go.
Wow. It amazes me the power of the mind, the thoughts, what that really does to our physical responses. I think it's almost terrifying to think that how much our thoughts can play into what happens in our body, be that our stomach even, right? Or our vision even, right? I mean, all of this is affected just by the thoughts we allow ourselves to start to have, and then how we start to breathe and how that...
Well, yeah, the other thing that I like about it is, a lot of people, meditation is wonderful, but people who are very anxious or have a lot of worries, it's very hard for them often to settle their mind enough to be able to even meditate. Whereas with the breathing, it doesn't matter what your mind is doing. If you simply get yourself to breathe in this pattern, it will quiet your mind and everything will take care of itself. So it's easier in that sense for people to do.
And is the idea to train your body to breathe like this consistently?
No, not all the time. Just when you want it to. First of all, to do it as a regular practice in order to correct any imbalances in your system, but also when you need to. If you're having a stressful day, do your breathing, because then instead of being stressed out and bombarding your body with stress chemicals and free radicals, you're providing your body with anti-inflammatory, soothing, calming, healing messages that are good for you. And my favorite example is when you're shopping in the grocery store and there's a long line and the person in front of you has a big basket of whatever they're getting and everyone's standing in line fuming. And then when you think they're done, they reach in their purse and they pull out a fistful of coupons and you just want to explode. So I tell my patients, I say, do your breathing when you're standing in line. That way you're giving yourself therapy instead of stress. So we have spent a lot of time waiting for things, and you could be breathing while you're doing that. You could do it breathing when you're doing your taxes so you don't, give yourself high blood pressure. By the way, it lowers blood pressure, so it's a nice other benefit of it.
Of course, it does that too. So really, it's a 20-minute treatment process is really what you're doing to your body that can treat an array of things, if not almost anything.
Well, I'm not supposed to claim it's a treatment, but I will say it's very beneficial. And you can do it longer than 20 minutes. Some people like to do it longer. Our book, The Healing Power of the Breath, explains this and many other breathing practices and leads you through them with a soundtrack. But it also tells you different things that you can use them for, different situations when you can use this breathing or that breathing. Like, for example, if you have to study or you have to sit and focus on a screen for a long period of time, we have certain activating breath practices that will help you maintain your attention focus and your energy level, that sort of thing. We also have practices for children. Of course, they need a different breathing rate than adults. Sometimes they need a faster breathing rate. And we have a whole set of practices we've developed for children. And many of them you can see online now. We work with a nonprofit called No Limit Generation, and their website, nolimitgen.org. they're showing a whole set of our videos about teaching children under stress or trauma or at-risk children breathing practices to help them go to sleep at night or calm down when they're anxious or upset, and also to manage their anger. So the whole process enhances their emotion self-regulation. And right now, during the coronavirus epidemic, I feel that all children are at risk. All children are living under stress now and uncertainty, and families are under all kinds of stress that affect the children. So I think this could be a way of helping children be less affected by all these stresses and uncertainties, help them stay calm, help the family stay calm by doing the practices together. And some of our teachers who work with children tell us that when the kids go home, they teach their siblings and their parents how to do these practices. So the kids are wonderful teachers, and they pick it up very quickly. And they really like being able to manage their emotions better. They really don't want to be out of control. They like being able to put themselves to sleep at night. Sometimes they'll listen for 40 minutes or an hour to the track because they just enjoy the way it helps them feel. So it has many, many different potential uses.
Yeah, that would be heaven sent to many parents right now, and the children themselves that are trying to deal with that.
Yeah, we're trying to develop more programs for children and train as many teachers as we can in our program. And we have a nonprofit. It's called the Breath Body Mind Foundation. So if people want to help support our ability, because we're often training people who don't have a lot of money, and trying to bring the practices and get them out to all the places where they're needed. And of course now we do all of our teaching online with video, just live like you're doing it. And it's wonderful because we can reach people anywhere in the world who need to learn these practices. And then we train them in how to teach them so they can keep teaching them wherever they may be.
That's a beautiful thing that you're teaching it and spreading that around for people, especially, like you said, especially during COVID right now.
Absolutely.
And what people are dealing with constantly.
And the healthcare providers also, they can do this breathing. If they have a 10-minute break, they can do the breathing. Or they can do the breathing through their mask because it's so gentle. If they learn how to do it really gently, then when they're working these long shifts and so stressed, they can do this breathing, and it helps them stay calm, and it increases their energy and their attention so they can keep working.
It is amazing work that you all are doing yourself as well as Dr. Brown. Thank you for what you're doing, for spending the free time, the pro bono work, all the help that you're giving to people and teaching people, and especially for coming on the show today as well. And teaching people here how to do it and sharing this research, because I know people hear the breathe thing and they just think way too simple to solve my complex problem.
Well, it's not. And it took a lot. Sometimes the simplest thing works the best. It seems simple once you figure it out, but figuring out was not so easy.
But
we have a lot of our papers are available on our website, which is breath-body-mind.com, breath-body-mind.com, and there are lots of videos that people can watch. And recently we gave some lectures at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neurosciences, and both of those lectures are on our homepage. One of them focuses on breathing, and the other one is on herbs and nutrients for you. So if you don't get a chance to talk to me about that, you can just go watch the webinar we did for UCLA on my website.
For sure. Well, you are welcome here anytime you want to get a message out or some research or ask people for money to research. Anything this show is a platform you can utilize any time. I appreciate you coming on, and so much I appreciate your work and being willing to take another avenue to look for different things other than just making sure people had pills and things. That makes you a hero in my book.
Thank you. It's I enjoy that very much. Appreciate what you said, and the opportunity that this gives us, inviting me here so that we can tell more people about it, which is what we're trying to do. So thank you for helping us.
Oh, well, I'm only the horn. That's all. You all are doing the hard work and the research. I'm actually going to add this to my life. I'm going to try at least for 30 days. I'm going to do a 30-day thing where for 20 minutes I sit down and do something, what we just did here. And I may journal along the way just to kind of, see what it's doing, what I'm thinking, what my starting points are. The one question I didn't get to were what was some of the test or the reading that you were doing on people? Was there some neurofeedback? What were you using to kind of scale the people that you were researching?
Well, first we just did standardized questionnaires that ask about all aspects of their emotional life, their anxiety, and so on. So we did test those kinds of test measures. In one of the studies that we're doing in conjunction with Dr. Chris Streeter at Boston University, we're using a special kind of brain scan called an MRS that measures neurotransmitter levels in the brain. And in that studies for depressed patients, and what we're finding is that when they do the breathing over a period of weeks, their depression scores go down exactly in proportion to the number of cumulative minutes they do the practices.
What?
And that's a combination of yoga and coherent breathing. But also the brain scans are showing an increase in their levels of a neurotransmitter called GABA in a structure in the brain called the thalamus. And that's important because GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it's needed because, as I said, we have to quiet down or inhibit the overactivity in the emotion centers. So if you can increase the inhibitory neurotransmitter, GABA, then you're going to be more effective at inhibiting the overactivity in the amygdala. And the thalamus sends branches. It has a connecting pathway to the amygdala and is in the center of the emotion regulatory system. It's the amygdala, the thalamus, and the frontal and prefrontal area of the brain. So to make a complex situation a little simpler, basically, it's another piece of evidence on the brain scan that what we're doing is having some of the effects that we think that it's having.
Yes, that's the evidence needed where people can see something. That's amazing, though, that the amount of points of depression scale went down was equal to the amount of minutes of the breath work they put in.
Exactly.
Whoa.
Exactly.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, I hope you'll get a chance to take one of our workshops because we teach, coherent breathing is just, it's the foundation, but then we teach many other things in our programs. And our book also explains, some people have to adapt it. Like if you have a respiratory problem already, this might be too slow a rate. You might have to start at 6 breaths per minute. And people who are recovering from COVID have to breathe very, very gently. They might have to start at 6 breaths per minute. 5 might be a little too much for them at starting out. So I always like to say that there are adaptations we've developed depending on somebody's physical condition. And also, if you have asthma, people who have asthma, generally speaking, the breathing will help improve their asthma. But if they're having an acute asthma attack or if they have very severe fragile asthma, then they have to be taught a special adaptation before doing coherent breathing, or it may make it more difficult for them to breathe. So when we train our teachers, we train them as to how to adapt the breathing to people with all different conditions and situations, because we're trying to make it safe for everyone. Nothing has 0 side effects, but this is pretty good.
Oh, well, the podcast here may have 0 side effects. If anything, it's going to help some people.
So
yeah, please, I'll certainly be encouraging people to sign up, buying your book, reading your papers, and diving into the work that you all are doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
thank you again for coming on the show and going over time too. Thank you for giving me such a length of time there. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
You too.